The champagne flute shattered against the marble floor of the Metropolitan Club's grand ballroom, its crystal fragments catching the light from the chandelier above. Security guards rushed toward the commotion as a woman in an elegant black dress stood frozen, her hand trembling where the glass had just been. Around her, Manhattan's elite gasped and whispered, their designer gowns rustling like autumn leaves. But their shock wasn't about the broken glass, it was about the man now kneeling before her, tears streaming down his face as he clutched a leather portfolio to his chest. "Please, Isabella," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I didn't know. I swear on my mother's grave, I didn't know what he had done to you." The woman looked down at him, her dark eyes reflecting both pain and something else, something that looked dangerously close to satisfaction. In the background, sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer with each passing second. What started as humiliation became the sweetest revenge, but nobody, not even Isabella herself, could have predicted how this night would end, or how a single phone call would turn a millionaire's world upside down forever. 3 months earlier, Isabella Martinez had been living a completely different life. At 28, she possessed the kind of quiet beauty that drew people in without demanding attention, warm brown eyes that reflected both intelligence and vulnerability, and hands that had learned gentleness through necessity. As a pediatric nurse at Mount Sinai Children's Hospital, she had dedicated her life to healing others, perhaps because she understood pain so intimately herself. Isabella's childhood had been marked by loss. She was 7 when her father, a construction worker, died in a scaffolding accident, leaving her mother, Carmen, to raise 3 children alone. Carmen worked double shifts at a laundromat, her fingers cracked from industrial detergent, her back bent from years of lifting heavy loads. Isabella learned early that love meant sacrifice, and sacrifice meant putting others before yourself. "Mija, education is the only thing no one can take from you," Carmen would say every morning, pressing a brown bag lunch into Isabella's hands before catching the 5:30 a.m. bus to work. Those words became Isabella's driving force through nursing school, through long nights studying while working part-time at a diner, through the crushing debt that followed her like a shadow. But Isabella had one weakness that she couldn't seem to overcome: she trusted too easily. Despite witnessing her mother's struggles, despite seeing how the world could crush the innocent, she still believed in the goodness of people. It was this trait that had led her to David Blackwood. David Blackwood III was everything Isabella wasn't: born into privilege, educated at private schools, accustomed to getting what he wanted without effort. At 32, he stood 6 feet tall with perfectly styled blonde hair and the kind of confident smile that had opened doors since childhood. His father owned Blackwood Industries, a real estate empire worth $800 million, and David was being groomed to take over the family business. They had met at a charity gala 18 months ago, where Isabella was volunteering to help serve dinner to homeless families. David had been there reluctantly, fulfilling a social obligation his mother had insisted upon. He watched her from across the room, captivated by the way she knelt down to speak to a shy little girl, making the child laugh despite her circumstances. "You're different," David had said when he finally approached her during a quiet moment. Isabella looked up from organizing donated toys, a smudge of dust on her cheek. "Different how?" "You actually care about this," he said, gesturing around the room. "Most people here are just taking photos for their Instagram." That conversation had led to coffee, then dinner, then 6 months of what Isabella believed was love. David could be charming when he wanted to be, bringing her flowers after particularly difficult shifts at the hospital, taking her to restaurants she could never afford, making her feel like she was the most important person in his world. The proposal came on a perfect spring evening in Central Park. David had arranged for a violinist to play her favorite song while he got down on one knee beside the Bethesda fountain. The ring was stunning, a 3-carat diamond that caught the light like captured starlight. "Isabella Martinez, you've shown me what it means to love someone more than yourself," David had said, his blue eyes sincere. "Will you marry me?" Through happy tears, she had said yes, believing she had found her fairy tale. But fairy tales, as Isabella would soon learn, sometimes have monsters hiding behind prince masks. The first red flag came 3 weeks after the engagement, during a dinner with David's parents at their Upper East Side penthouse. Isabella had dressed carefully in a simple black dress that had cost her a week's salary, wanting desperately to make a good impression. David's mother, Margaret Blackwood, was a woman who wielded politeness like a weapon. Tall and razor-thin, with silver hair pulled into a perfect chignon, she smiled with her mouth but not her eyes. "Isabella, dear," Margaret said over the appetizer course, "David tells us you work at a hospital." "How noble." The word noble dripped with condescension, but Isabella tried to remain gracious. "I love working with children. They have such resilience." "Of course they do," Margaret replied, cutting her salmon with surgical precision. "Though I imagine it must be quite draining, dealing with such unfortunate circumstances all the time." David's father, Robert Blackwood Sr., was a man who commanded rooms simply by entering them. At 65, he still possessed the sharp intensity that had built his empire. He studied Isabella throughout dinner like she was a business deal he was evaluating. "Tell me, Isabella," Robert said during dessert, "what are your family's circumstances?" Isabella's stomach tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "My mother works very hard to support our family. We may not have much money, but we have integrity." Margaret and Robert exchanged a look that Isabella caught but couldn't interpret. David reached over and squeezed her hand, but his grip felt less reassuring than she had hoped. After dinner, as they waited for the valet to bring David's BMW, Isabella overheard a conversation that would haunt her for weeks to come. "She seems sweet enough," Margaret was saying to David in the penthouse elevator lobby, her voice carrying through the marble hallway. "Mother, I love her," David replied, but his tone lacked conviction. "Love is a luxury, darling," Margaret's voice was sharp now. "Marriage is a business arrangement. That girl's family has nothing to offer our family's reputation. Nothing to offer the business." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that perhaps this engagement should remain temporary. Enjoy yourself, dear, but remember who you are and where you belong." Isabella felt something cold settle in her chest as she listened, but she pushed the feeling down. David had proposed to her, hadn't he? He had chosen her. She was just being paranoid. The second red flag came a month later, at David's birthday party. Isabella had worked extra shifts to buy him a vintage watch she had found at an estate sale, a 1960s Omega that she thought he would appreciate. The party was at the Blackwood penthouse, filled with David's prep school friends and business associates. "Oh, David got a present from the help," laughed someone named Chadwick, a trust fund baby with a weak chin and a cruel smile. "How quaint." Isabella felt heat rise in her cheeks, but David didn't defend her. Instead, he unwrapped the watch with what looked like embarrassment. "It's vintage," Isabella said quietly, aware that everyone was watching. "Yes, it certainly is," David replied, setting it aside without really looking at it. "Thank you, Isabella." Later that night, Isabella found the watch in David's bathroom trash can, still in its presentation box. The final red flag came just 2 weeks before what would have been their wedding day. Isabella was at David's apartment, making dinner while he worked late at the office. She was looking for a pen to write a grocery list when she opened his desk drawer and found something that made her world crumble. It was a contract, printed on expensive letterhead, signed by both David and his father. The document was titled Relationship Termination Agreement, and it outlined exactly when and how David would end their engagement. According to the timeline, he was supposed to break up with her the week after their wedding, citing incompatible life goals. In exchange, Robert Blackwood would transfer a downtown property worth $12 million to David's name. Isabella's hands shook as she read the clinical language describing their entire relationship as a temporary arrangement designed to satisfy familial expectations while maintaining long-term strategic goals. There was even a section detailing how David should handle the breakup to minimize public relations complications. She heard David's key in the lock and quickly closed the drawer, her heart hammering against her ribs. When he entered the apartment, she was standing at the stove, stirring pasta sauce with mechanical movements. "Smells good, babe," David said, kissing her cheek. His lips felt like ice against her skin. "David," she said without turning around, "do you love me?" "Of course I do. Why would you ask that?" She turned to face him then, and perhaps he saw something in her eyes that made him take a step back. "Because I found the contract." The color drained from David's face, and for a moment, Isabella saw the real man behind the charming facade, calculating, cold, and completely without remorse. "Isabella, I can explain." "Explain what?" "That our entire relationship has been a lie. That you never intended to marry me. That I've been nothing more than a temporary entertainment." David's expression hardened. "Look, you were never going to fit into my world anyway. Did you really think this was going to work long-term? You're a nurse from Queens, Isabella. I need someone who can help advance my career, not hold it back." The cruelty in his voice was breathtaking. Isabella felt something break inside her chest, something that she wasn't sure would ever heal properly. "I want you out of my life," she whispered. "Fine," David said, straightening his tie. "But don't think you're getting any kind of settlement. That ring goes back to the jewelry store, and you'll sign a non-disclosure agreement about our relationship. My lawyer will be in touch." As Isabella packed her few belongings from his apartment, she made herself a promise. She would never again allow someone to make her feel small, worthless, or disposable. She would never again trust someone who hadn't earned it. But she had no idea that David Blackwood wasn't finished with her yet. The humiliation campaign began 3 weeks after their breakup, and it was methodical in its cruelty. David Blackwood had decided that simply discarding Isabella wasn't enough. He wanted to ensure that she understood her place in the world, and that place was beneath him. It started small, almost imperceptibly. Isabella began noticing changes at work that initially seemed like coincidences. Her supervisor, Nancy Rodriguez, called her into the office on a Tuesday morning. "Isabella, I need to talk to you about your performance reviews," Nancy said, her usually warm demeanor replaced by professional coldness. Isabella sat down, confused. "Is there a problem?" "My patient satisfaction scores have been consistently high." Nancy shuffled through a stack of papers, avoiding eye contact. "We've received some concerns about your professionalism. There have been complaints about your attitude toward some of our more prominent families." "What complaints? From whom?" "I can't reveal specific names, but the complaints suggest that you've been difficult to work with. Standoffish. Some have even suggested you have a chip on your shoulder about economic differences." Isabella felt the blood drain from her face. "Nancy, you know that's not true. I've always treated every family with respect, regardless of their background." "Look, Isabella," Nancy sighed, "I've worked with you for 3 years. I know what kind of nurse you are. But the hospital administration is very concerned about maintaining relationships with our donor families. The Blackwood Foundation has been particularly generous to our children's wing." The implication hit Isabella like a physical blow. David was using his family's influence to destroy her professionally. "Are you putting me on probation?" "Not yet," Nancy said quietly. "But I need you to be extra careful about your interactions with families. Especially wealthy families. We can't afford to lose their support." That same week, Isabella discovered that her volunteer position at the children's literacy program had been restructured, effectively eliminating her role. The program coordinator, a nervous woman named Patricia, could barely look at Isabella when delivering the news. "It's nothing personal," Patricia stammered. "We're just going in a different direction with our volunteer requirements." Isabella knew it was a lie, but she couldn't prove it. David's reach was longer than she had imagined. The next attack came from an unexpected angle. Isabella's mother called her, sobbing, on a Thursday evening. "Mija, they're saying I have to move out," Carmen cried into the phone. "The landlord says there are complaints about me, that I'm disturbing other tenants." "What complaints, Mama? You barely make noise." "They say I play music too loud, that I have too many visitors." "Isabella, you know this isn't true. I work 16 hours a day, when would I have time for loud music or visitors?" Isabella's hands clenched into fists. She knew exactly what was happening. The building where her mother lived was owned by a subsidiary of Blackwood Industries. David was using his family's properties to terrorize an elderly woman who had done nothing but raise her children with dignity. "Don't worry, Mama. We'll figure this out." But privately, Isabella felt powerless. How do you fight someone who has unlimited resources and no conscience? The psychological warfare continued for weeks. Isabella would see David's friends at coffee shops near the hospital, smirking at her as she passed. She received anonymous calls in the middle of the night, no one speaking, just silence and then a hang-up. Her car was vandalized twice in the hospital parking garage, nothing that could be traced back to anyone specific, but the message was clear. You are nothing. You are powerless. You are alone. What would you do in this situation? Tell us in the comments below. The breaking point came when Isabella discovered that David had been spreading rumors about her throughout Manhattan's social circles. She learned this from an unexpected source, her friend Maria, who worked as a caterer for high-end events. "Isabella, I have to tell you something," Maria said over coffee, her face grim. "I've been hearing your name at parties, and it's not good." "What are you talking about?" "There's a guy named David Blackwood who's been telling people that you were basically stalking him. He's saying you were obsessed with his money, that you tried to trap him into marriage, and when he broke up with you, you became vengeful." Isabella felt sick. "Maria, you know that's not true." "Of course I know that. But these rich people, they believe whatever they want to believe. And now some of them are saying you're dangerous, that people should avoid hiring you or doing business with you." The systematic destruction of her reputation was breathtaking in its thoroughness. David wasn't just discarding her, he was ensuring that she would never recover, never move on, never forget her place. That night, Isabella sat in her small studio apartment and cried harder than she had since her father's death. She felt trapped, helpless, crushed under the weight of David's privileged cruelty. For the first time in her life, she understood why some people give up hope. But then she remembered her mother's words, "Education is the only thing no one can take from you." David could destroy her reputation, threaten her job, terrorize her family, but he couldn't take away her intelligence, her skills, or her determination. Isabella wiped her tears and opened her laptop. If David Blackwood wanted a war, she would give him one. But first, she needed to understand exactly who she was fighting. She began researching the Blackwood family with the methodical thoroughness she had once applied to her nursing studies. What she discovered made her realize that David's cruelty wasn't an aberration, it was a family tradition. Robert Blackwood Sr. had built his fortune by systematically destroying smaller real estate developers, often using legal loopholes to force families out of properties that had been in their possession for generations. There were dozens of lawsuits against Blackwood Industries, most of which had been settled out of court with non-disclosure agreements. But Isabella found something else in her research, something that made her pulse quicken. 3 years ago, a small construction company had filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Blackwood Industries, claiming that corner cutting on a residential project had led to a scaffolding collapse that killed 2 workers. The case had been dismissed on a technicality, but Isabella recognized one of the names in the court documents. Miguel Santos had been one of the workers who died, and he had worked with Isabella's father on several projects before his death. She dug deeper and found more connections. The construction company that had employed her father had been driven out of business by Blackwood Industries' predatory bidding practices. Her father had died on a Blackwood project, using substandard safety equipment that Robert Blackwood had insisted on to cut costs. David hadn't just destroyed her future, his family had destroyed her past. Isabella closed her laptop and sat in the darkness of her apartment, feeling something cold and determined settle in her chest. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about justice for her father, for Miguel Santos, for everyone who had been crushed under the Blackwood family's ruthless ambition. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she had memorized years ago but never used. "Uncle Carlos? It's Isabella. I need to ask you about Papa's accident." Carlos Martinez was Carmen's brother, a man who had worked construction for 40 years and had seen the industry's darkest corners. When Isabella was growing up, he had been the family member who asked uncomfortable questions, who never quite believed official explanations. "Mija," Carlos said, his voice heavy with old grief. "Why are you asking about that now?" "Because I think the people responsible are still hurting families, Uncle. And I think I might be able to do something about it." There was a long pause. Then Carlos said, "Meet me tomorrow night. There are things about your papa's death that your mama doesn't know. Things I've been carrying for 15 years. As Isabella hung up the phone, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. Not the naive hope of her earlier life, but something harder, more determined. The hope of someone who had been pushed beyond their breaking point and discovered they were stronger than they had ever imagined. Can you guess what happens next? Drop your predictions below. The next evening, Isabella met Carlos at a small diner in Queens, far from Manhattan's glittering towers. Carlos looked older than his 58 years, his hands scarred from decades of manual labor, his eyes carrying the weight of secrets. "Your papa was a good man," Carlos began, stirring his coffee absently. "Honest. Maybe too honest for his own good." "What do you mean?" Carlos pulled a manila folder from his jacket. "2 weeks before he died, your papa came to me with these documents. He had discovered that Blackwood Industries was using substandard materials on the residential project where he was working. Cheap steel, defective safety equipment, shortcuts that put workers at risk." Isabella's hands trembled as she opened the folder. Inside were photographs of rusted equipment, safety reports that had been falsified, and her father's own handwritten notes documenting dangerous conditions. Papa was going to report this? He was going to take it to OSHA, to the city building department, to anyone who would listen. He said he couldn't sleep at night knowing that families would be living in buildings that might collapse, that workers might die because of these shortcuts. Then why didn't he? Carlos's voice broke slightly. "Because they killed him first." The words hung in the air like a physical weight. Isabella stared at her uncle, trying to process what he had just said. "The scaffolding collapse wasn't an accident," Carlos continued. "Your papa had been asking too many questions, making too much noise. The night before he died, he got a phone call at home. I was there, helping him prepare his report. The caller told him to back off, to mind his own business if he wanted to keep his job and protect his family." "Did he recognize the voice?" "He said it sounded like Robert Blackwood himself. Your papa laughed it off, said that rich men don't make their own threatening phone calls. But the next morning..." Carlos pulled out a photograph that made Isabella's breath catch. It showed the scaffolding after the collapse, but from an angle she had never seen before. In the image, she could clearly see that several crucial support bolts had been removed. "This wasn't taken by the official investigators," Carlos said. "I took this with a disposable camera before the scene was cleaned up. Look at those connection points, someone deliberately sabotaged that scaffolding." Isabella felt rage building in her chest, white-hot and consuming. "Why didn't you take this to the police?" "With what proof? A photo from a grieving brother-in-law and some construction workers' suspicions?" Against the most powerful real estate family in New York. Carlos shook his head. I was scared, Mija. I had my own family to protect. But I kept these documents, hoping that someday someone would be in a position to use them. Carlos reached across the table and took Isabella's hand. Your papa would be proud of the woman you've become. And he would want you to finish what he started. As Isabella left the diner that night, she carried more than just documents, she carried the weight of her father's unfinished mission and the burning desire to finally bring the Blackwood family to justice. But she also carried something else, the knowledge that she was no longer fighting alone. Her father's spirit was with her, and soon, she would discover that other allies were closer than she had ever imagined. The war against the Blackwoods was about to begin, and Isabella Martinez was ready to fight with everything she had. But little did she know that the most powerful ally of all was about to enter her life in the most unexpected way possible. Isabella spent the next 2 weeks meticulously organizing her father's documents and Carlos's photographs, cross-referencing them with public records and news reports from 15 years ago. She worked late into the night, fueled by coffee and determination, building what she hoped would be an airtight case against Blackwood Industries. It was during one of these late-night research sessions that she made a discovery that changed everything. While searching through old newspaper archives, Isabella found a small article buried on page 7 of the New York Times, dated 3 days after her father's death. The headline read, "Construction worker dies in scaffolding collapse, company faces safety questions." But it wasn't the article itself that caught her attention, it was the photograph accompanying it. In the background of the image showing the accident site, partially obscured by emergency vehicles, stood a young man in an expensive suit. He was maybe 19 or 20, tall and lean, with dark hair and an intense expression as he surveyed the scene. Isabella magnified the image on her computer screen and felt her heart skip. There was something familiar about the man's face, something that nagged at her memory. She saved the photograph and continued her research, but the image haunted her for the rest of the night. The next morning brought news that made Isabella's world shift on its axis once again. She was getting ready for work when her phone rang, an unknown number with a Manhattan area code. Isabella Martinez? The voice was crisp, professional, unmistakably expensive. Yes, who is this? My name is Jonathan Phillips. I'm an attorney with Phillips, Crane and Associates. I need to speak with you about a matter of utmost urgency regarding your former relationship with David Blackwood. Isabella felt her stomach clench. If David sent you to intimidate me. Miss Martinez, I assure you that Mr. David Blackwood did not send me. In fact, I'm calling because I represent someone who has a vested interest in seeing justice done regarding the Blackwood family's business practices. I don't understand. Could you meet me this afternoon? I have something to show you that I believe will be of great interest. Something that could change the trajectory of your situation entirely. Against her better judgment, Isabella agreed to meet the lawyer at his Park Avenue office. She spent the rest of her morning shift at the hospital distracted, wondering what new twist her life was about to take. Phillips, Crane and Associates occupied 3 floors of a prestigious Manhattan high-rise. The receptionist led Isabella through marble corridors lined with expensive artwork to a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Jonathan Phillips was a man in his 50s with silver hair and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He stood when Isabella entered, extending his hand with genuine warmth. Miss Martinez, thank you for coming. Please, sit down. Can I offer you coffee? Water? I'm fine, Isabella said, settling into a leather chair that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Mr. Phillips, what is this about? Phillips opened a thick folder on his desk and pulled out a photograph. The same newspaper image Isabella had found the night before, but this was a cleaner, high-resolution version. Do you recognize the person in this photograph? Isabella studied the image again, and suddenly, the memory clicked into place. "Oh my God," she whispered. The young man in the expensive suit wasn't just a random bystander at her father's accident scene. She had seen him before, years later, at the charity gala where she had first met David. He had been sitting at the head table, speaking quietly with several older men in suits. Someone had mentioned his name during the evening, but Isabella hadn't paid attention at the time. "That's Alexander Rothschild," Philip said, confirming her growing realization. "Perhaps you know him better by his current title, Alexander Rothschild IV, CEO and primary shareholder of Rothschild Global Holdings." Isabella's breath caught. Everyone in New York knew the Rothschild name, old money, older power, a family that had been quietly accumulating wealth and influence for over a century. But what was Alexander Rothschild doing at her father's accident scene? "Miss Martinez," Phillips continued, "Alexander Rothschild has been quietly investigating Blackwood Industries for 15 years. He believes that Robert Blackwood Sr. was responsible for your father's death, and he has been methodically gathering evidence to prove it." "But why?" Isabella asked, struggling to process this information. Why would someone like Alexander Rothschild care about a construction worker's death? Philip smiled grimly. Because Miguel Santos, the other worker who died in that scaffolding collapse, was Alexander's childhood friend. The revelation hit Isabella like a physical blow. She remembered Carlos mentioning Miguel Santos, remembered seeing his name in the wrongful death lawsuit documents. But she had never connected him to the Rothschild family. "I don't understand," Isabella said weakly. Alexander's maternal grandmother was Maria Santos, Miguel's aunt. The Rothschild family has Portuguese roots that go back several generations. Miguel Santos grew up in the same Queens neighborhood where Alexander spent his summers as a child, staying with his grandmother. Despite their vastly different circumstances, they formed a close friendship. Phillips pulled out another photograph, this one clearly personal. It showed two young boys, maybe 10 years old, sitting on a stoop and sharing a candy bar. One was clearly Miguel. Isabella could see the resemblance to the man she remembered from her father's funeral. The other was unmistakably a young Alexander Rothschild. When Miguel died, Alexander was devastated. He was 19, already working in the family business, and he swore that he would find out what really happened. He's been investigating Blackwood Industries ever since, using his resources to build a case that would finally bring them to justice. Isabella's head was spinning. So when David started targeting me, Alexander became aware of the situation. He's been monitoring Blackwood Industries' activities very closely. When David began his campaign against you, Alexander realized that you might be the key to finally exposing the truth about your father's and Miguel's deaths. Phillips reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a business card, thick, expensive paper with elegant typography. But instead of handing it to Isabella, he set it on the desk between them. "Alexander would like to meet with you, Miss Martinez. He has a proposition that I think you'll find very interesting." Isabella stared at the card. The name, Alexander Rothschild IV, was embossed in gold letters, but it was the handwritten note on the back that made her pulse quicken, "For Miguel, for your father, and for justice." A.R. What kind of proposition? Phillips leaned back in his chair. The kind that could destroy the Blackwood family once and for all. But it would require courage, intelligence, and a willingness to take significant risks. Isabella thought about her father, about Miguel Santos, about all the families who had been destroyed by Blackwood Industries' greed. She thought about David's cruelty, about her mother's tears, about the systematic destruction of everything she had worked to build. "When does he want to meet?" "Tonight," Philip said. "But Miss Martinez, I want you to understand, once you walk into this room with Alexander Rothschild, there's no going back. The Blackwood family has powerful friends and unlimited resources. If you join forces with Alexander, you'll be declaring war against one of the most dangerous families in New York." Isabella picked up the business card and held it in her trembling fingers. For a moment, she felt the old fear creeping back, the instinct to run, to hide, to accept her place as a victim. But then she remembered her father's voice, reading her bedtime stories when she was small. She remembered Miguel Santos at her father's funeral, his widow crying over two small children. She remembered David's cold smile as he discarded her like trash. "Mr. Phillips," Isabella said, standing up with new determination, "please tell Mr. Rothschild that I'll be there." As she left the law office, Isabella felt something she hadn't experienced in months, the electric thrill of hope mixed with purpose. She was no longer alone in her fight against the Blackwoods. But little did she know that Alexander Rothschild had a plan that would require her to do something that terrified her more than anything else. She would have to face David Blackwood one more time, in front of all of Manhattan's elite. And this time, she would be ready for him. The address Alexander Rothschild had given Isabella led her to a brownstone on the Upper East Side, elegant and understated in the way that only truly old money could achieve. As she stood on the limestone steps at 8 o'clock that evening, Isabella felt the weight of 15 years of injustice pressing down on her shoulders. The door opened before she could knock, revealing a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and a warm smile. "You must be Isabella," the woman said. "I'm Eleanor Rothschild, Alexander's mother. Please, come in." Isabella followed Eleanor through a foyer lined with family photographs spanning several generations. She caught glimpses of familiar faces, presidents, business leaders, cultural icons, but what struck her most were the candid family shots interspersed among them. These weren't the cold, formal portraits she associated with wealthy families. These pictures showed real affection, real connection. "Alexander is in his study," Eleanor said, leading Isabella down a hallway lined with bookshelves. "I want you to know, dear, that what you're doing takes extraordinary courage. Miguel was very special to our family." The study was a warm, lived-in space with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a fireplace crackling softly in the corner, and Persian rugs that had probably been in the family for generations. Behind an antique mahogany desk sat Alexander Rothschild, and Isabella was struck by how different he looked from the privileged socialites she had encountered in David's world. Alexander was tall and lean, with dark hair that showed premature silver at the temples and deep brown eyes that seemed to hold both intelligence and sadness. He wore a simple sweater and jeans, and when he stood to greet her, Isabella noticed that his handshake was firm but not performatively aggressive. "Miss Martinez," he said, his voice carrying a slight Portuguese accent that spoke to his grandmother's heritage. "Thank you for coming. I know this must be overwhelming. Please, call me Isabella. And yes, it is overwhelming, but not in the way you might think." Alexander gestured for her to sit in a comfortable armchair near the fireplace. "What do you mean?" Isabella took a breath, organizing her thoughts. "For months, I've felt powerless. David and his family have been systematically destroying my life, and I had no way to fight back. Learning that I'm not alone in this fight, it's the first hope I've felt in a very long time." Alexander's expression softened. Miguel used to say that hope was the most dangerous weapon the poor could wield against the rich. It makes us harder to control. "Tell me about him." "About Miguel." Alexander walked to the fireplace and picked up a framed photograph from the mantel, the same image of two boys sharing candy that Phillips had shown her earlier. "Miguel was everything I wasn't supposed to be friends with," Alexander said with a small smile. "His family had nothing, mine had everything. But my grandmother Maria raised me to understand that wealth was a responsibility, not a privilege. Every summer, she would send me to stay with Miguel's family in Queens, to learn what real life looked like. That must have been quite a culture shock." "It was the best education I ever received," Alexander said firmly. Miguel's mother, Rosa, worked 3 jobs to support 4 children. Miguel himself started working when he was 12, helping his father with construction jobs on weekends. But he never complained, never felt sorry for himself. He had dreams. He wanted to become an engineer, to build bridges instead of just working on them. Alexander's voice grew heavy with grief. The day he died, Miguel had just gotten accepted to community college. He was going to study engineering part-time while continuing construction work. Rosa called to tell me the news that morning. 2 hours later, she called back to tell me he was dead. Isabella felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm so sorry." The official investigation was a joke, Alexander continued, his voice hardening. OSHA ruled it an equipment failure. The police said there was no evidence of foul play. But I knew Miguel, he was obsessive about safety, especially after your father started raising concerns about the site conditions. You knew my father was investigating? Alexander returned to his seat, his expression grave. Isabella, I've spent 15 years piecing together what happened on that construction site. Your father wasn't just a whistleblower, he was gathering evidence that could have brought down Blackwood Industries entirely. The substandard materials, the falsified safety reports, the bribery of building inspectors, it was a conspiracy that went all the way to the top. He opened a thick portfolio on his desk and pulled out a document that made Isabella's breath catch. It was a contract, bearing the letterhead of Blackstone Holdings, dated 3 months ago. Her signature was there, clear as day, next to terms she had never agreed to. The document stipulated that she would forfeit all claims to any joint assets, including the beach house in Malibu that had belonged to her grandmother, in exchange for a settlement of $50,000. "This is impossible," Isabella whispered, her voice barely audible above the classical music still playing in the background. "I never signed this." Marcus smiled, his expression predatory. "Oh, but you did, my dear. Right here, witnessed by my attorney and notarized. You were quite eager to sign it, actually, after I explained how messy things could get if you didn't cooperate." Isabella's mind raced back to that terrible day 3 months ago when Marcus had called her to his penthouse, claiming he wanted to discuss their breakup civilly. She had been so naive, so trusting. She remembered signing papers, but Marcus had told her they were just formalities to close their joint bank account. The champagne he had insisted she drink to toast their friendship had made her drowsy, her vision slightly blurred. "You drugged me," she said, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. "I prefer to think of it as helping you relax so you could make rational decisions," Marcus replied smoothly. "The important thing is, the contract is legal and binding. Your grandmother's house now belongs to me, along with everything else you thought you owned." The party guests had begun to notice the commotion. Isabella could feel their eyes boring into her, could hear the whispered speculation beginning to ripple through the crowd. She recognized several faces from society pages, influential people whose opinions could make or break reputations in their circle. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus announced, his voice carrying clearly across the terrace. "I'd like to share something with you all. My former fiancée here has been claiming that I somehow cheated her out of property that rightfully belonged to me. I thought it only fair to set the record straight." Isabella felt the blood drain from her face as Marcus held up the forged contract for everyone to see. This document, signed willingly by Isabella 3 months ago, clearly shows that she received fair compensation for any claims she might have had on my assets. Yet she continues to harass me with frivolous legal threats. The crowd murmured, some people pulling out their phones to record the unfolding drama. Isabella recognized Jennifer Walsh, a prominent gossip columnist, frantically typing notes on her device. By tomorrow, this humiliation would be splashed across every society blog and newspaper in the city. "That's not true," Isabella said, but her voice came out weak and uncertain. "I never." "Oh, Isabella," Marcus interrupted with fake concern. "I understand you're having financial difficulties since our breakup. Perhaps the stress has affected your memory. But lying about our business arrangements? That's beneath even you." The words hit their mark perfectly. Isabella had indeed been struggling financially since their split, working double shifts at the hospital just to make rent on her small apartment. Everyone at the party knew about her reduced circumstances, and Marcus was expertly painting her as a desperate woman making false claims for money. What would you do in this situation? Can you imagine being publicly humiliated like this by someone you once loved? Tell us in the comments below. Dar. Elizabeth Harper, a respected cardiologist who had been Isabella's mentor, stepped forward from the crowd. Marcus, this seems rather cruel. Perhaps this conversation should be private? Dr. Harper, with all due respect, Isabella made this public when she began spreading lies about me. I'm simply defending my reputation with facts. Marcus gestured to the contract again. Everything here is perfectly legal and above board. Isabella's best friend Sarah Chen, a corporate lawyer who had been quietly observing from across the terrace, began making her way through the crowd. But before she could reach Isabella, Marcus played his next card. In fact, he continued, his voice growing more confident as he sensed victory, I have something else that might interest everyone here. Isabella, would you like to explain to our friends about your little visit to my office last week? The one where security cameras caught you attempting to break into my safe. Isabella's heart stopped. She had gone to Marcus's office building, desperate to find some evidence of his fraud, but she had never even made it past the lobby. The security guard had recognized her and asked her to leave, which she had done immediately. But Marcus was twisting even that innocent visit into something sinister. I went there to talk to you, she said, her voice growing stronger with indignation. I wanted to ask you to do the right thing, to admit what you'd done to me. The security footage tells a different story, Marcus lied smoothly. My lawyers are already reviewing it to determine if charges should be filed. The crowd's murmur grew louder, and Isabella could see the doubt creeping into even her friend's eyes. Marcus was a master manipulator, and he was orchestrating her public destruction with surgical precision. Sarah finally reached Isabella's side, her professional demeanor intact despite the fury Isabella could see blazing in her dark eyes. Isabella, don't say another word without legal representation present. Oh, look, Marcus said with mock delight. Isabella's lawyer friend has arrived to help her craft more stories. Sarah, I remember you from law school. Still handling ambulance chaser cases, I see. Sarah's jaw tightened, but she kept her composure. My client has nothing more to say at this time. If you have accusations to make, Marcus, make them through proper legal channels. Client. Marcus laughed. Sarah, surely even you wouldn't take such an obvious fraud case. Unless. He paused dramatically, letting his implication hang in the air. Unless Isabella is paying you with something other than money? The crowd gasped at the crude insinuation, and Isabella felt tears of rage and humiliation burning behind her eyes. Marcus was destroying not just her reputation but Sarah's as well, suggesting an inappropriate relationship between them that didn't exist. You bastard, Isabella whispered, but her voice was drowned out by the excited chatter of the party guests. Marcus had orchestrated the perfect public execution, and Isabella was dying 1,000 deaths in front of the city's most influential people. She could already imagine the headlines: desperate ex-fiancée exposed as fraud, society nurse's false claims backfire, Marcus Whitfield vindicated against gold diggers' lies. But then, as Marcus basked in his apparent victory, something incredible happened. The classical music stopped abruptly, replaced by the sound of helicopter rotors growing louder and louder overhead. The party guests looked up in confusion as a sleek black helicopter began descending toward the mansion's expansive lawn, its powerful downdraft sending napkins and decorations flying across the terrace. What the hell? Marcus muttered, his confident facade cracking for the first time that evening. The helicopter touched down gracefully on the perfectly manicured grass, and its door opened to reveal a figure that made several people in the crowd gasp with recognition. A tall, distinguished man in his 60s stepped out, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the helicopter ride, his charcoal suit clearly custom-made and worth more than most people's cars. Is that? Jennifer Walsh whispered, her gossip columnist instincts immediately recognizing the significance of this arrival. "Oh my God, that's Alexander Rothschild." Isabella's heart nearly stopped. Alexander Rothschild was a name whispered in the highest echelons of global finance, a trillionaire whose wealth made even Marcus's fortune look like pocket change. He was known for his reclusive nature, rarely making public appearances, and never at social gatherings like this. His presence at the party was as unexpected as lightning striking the same place twice. Rothschild walked across the lawn with measured steps, his pale blue eyes scanning the crowd of wealthy partygoers as if evaluating livestock. Two security men flanked him, their professional bearing and subtle earpieces marking them as serious protection. The party guests automatically parted to create a path, their earlier chatter dying to respectful whispers. "Mr. Whitfield," Rothschild said as he approached the terrace, his voice carrying a slight British accent that spoke of old money and older power. "I believe we need to have a conversation." Marcus's face had gone pale, but he quickly tried to recover his composure. "Mr. Rothschild, what an unexpected honor. Welcome to my home. I had no idea you were in the city. I make it my business to know when certain documents surface," Rothschild replied coolly, his eyes moving to the contract still clutched in Marcus's hand. "Particularly documents bearing forged signatures related to properties that interest me." The crowd seemed to collectively hold its breath. Isabella felt confused and hopeful at the same time. How could Alexander Rothschild possibly know about her grandmother's beach house, and why would he care about a forged contract? Rothschild turned his attention to Isabella, studying her face with an intensity that made her want to shrink into herself. "Miss Isabella Marie Santos, I presume? Granddaughter of Elena Santos?" Isabella nodded, too shocked to speak. How did this powerful man know her full name, know her grandmother's name? "Your grandmother was a remarkable woman," Rothschild continued, his stern expression softening slightly. "She saved my life once, many years ago. I've been looking for her family for quite some time." The revelation sent another wave of whispers through the crowd. Isabella's mind reeled as she tried to process what was happening. Her grandmother Elena had died 5 years ago, and Isabella had always known she had worked as a nurse during World War II, but she had never mentioned saving anyone particularly important. "I don't understand," Isabella managed to say. "Your grandmother treated me in a field hospital in France in 1944, Rothschild explained, his voice carrying the weight of old memories. "I was barely 18, dying from shrapnel wounds after my unit was ambushed. The regular doctors had given up on me, but Elena Santos refused to let me die. She sat with me for 3 days and nights, changing my bandages, forcing medicine down my throat, talking to me when I drifted in and out of consciousness." Isabella felt tears pricking her eyes as she imagined her kind, gentle grandmother as a young woman, fighting to save lives in the chaos of war. "She gave me a silver locket before I was transferred to a hospital in England," Rothschild continued. Inside was a photograph of her family's beach house in California, and an address. "She made me promise that if I ever became successful, I would find her family and repay the debt I owed her." Marcus looked like he might be sick. "Mr. Rothschild, I'm sure this is all very touching, but I fail to see what it has to do with the beach house in Malibu." Rothschild cut him off sharply. "The one you fraudulently obtained through forged documents, belonged to Elena Santos's family for 3 generations. It was built by Isabella's great-grandfather in 1923. I've been searching for that house, and for Elena's family, for over 80 years." The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word of this extraordinary revelation. Isabella felt like she was living in a dream, unable to fully comprehend that this legendary figure was connected to her family's history. Rothschild reached into his jacket and pulled out an old, tarnished silver locket. Even from several feet away, Isabella could see it was identical to the one her grandmother had worn every day until her death, the one that now hung around Isabella's own neck beneath her dress. "I carry this with me always," Rothschild said, holding up the locket. As a reminder of the debt I owe to Elena Santos and her family. A debt that includes ensuring her granddaughter is never taken advantage of by parasites like you, Whitfield. Marcus's face had turned a sickly gray color. Sir, there must be some misunderstanding. The contract was signed voluntarily. The contract is a forgery, Rothschild stated flatly. My forensics team analyzed the signature 3 days ago when my investigators brought it to my attention. The ink composition is different from the pen used to sign the rest of the document, the pressure points are inconsistent with Isabella's normal writing pattern, and most tellingly, it was signed with her left hand despite the fact that she is right-handed. Sarah Chin stepped forward, her professional curiosity overcoming her shock. How did you know about the contract? Rothschild smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. I have extensive interests in this city, Ms. Chen. When someone attempts to defraud the granddaughter of the woman who saved my life, I tend to hear about it quickly. My people have been investigating Mr. Whitfield's business practices for some time now. He turned back to Marcus, who looked like a cornered animal. Did you really think you could drug a young woman, forge her signature, and steal her family's property without consequences? Did you believe your money and connections made you untouchable? The party guests were now openly staring, some still recording with their phones. Isabella could see Jennifer Walsh frantically typing, probably already composing the story that would destroy Marcus's reputation by morning. I want you to know, Rothschild continued, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed, that I own the banks that hold the mortgages on 3 of your commercial properties. I own shares in the companies that supply your hotels with everything from linens to liquor. I have business relationships with every major client your firm has worked with in the past 5 years. Marcus's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. Sir, please, if we could discuss this privately. Privacy is for people who conduct their business honorably, Rothschild cut him off. You chose to humiliate Isabella publicly, so your consequences will be equally public. He gestured to one of his security men, who immediately produced a thick folder and handed it to Rothschild. These are copies of the real estate documents showing that the Malibu Beach house was purchased by Isabella's great-grandfather, Roberto Santos, in 1923. These are the will documents showing that it passed to his son, then to Elena Santos, and finally to Isabella upon her grandmother's death. Isabella watched in amazement as Rothschild methodically destroyed every lie Marcus had built his humiliation upon. These, Rothschild continued, pulling out another set of papers, are sworn affidavits from 3 witnesses who saw Marcus Whitfield's assistant purchasing Rohypnol from an unlicensed pharmacy 6 weeks ago. The same assistant who has agreed to testify against his former employer in exchange for immunity. Marcus's face was now completely white, beads of sweat forming on his forehead despite the cool evening air. This is all circumstantial. And this, Rothschild said, producing a small recording device, is audio from the security cameras in your penthouse 3 months ago. Cameras you apparently forgot were installed by your own security company. He pressed a button, and Marcus's voice filled the air, clear and damning, just sign here, Isabella. You won't remember any of this tomorrow anyway. The Rohypnol will make sure of that. By the time you wake up, I'll own everything you thought belonged to you. The crowd erupted in shocked gasps and angry murmurs. Several people began backing away from Marcus as if he were radioactive. Isabella felt a surge of vindication so powerful it nearly brought her to her knees. You recorded me in my own home. Marcus sputtered, his composure finally cracking completely. Your own security system recorded you, Rothschild corrected. I simply acquired the footage through legal channels. It's amazing what kind of information becomes available when you have the resources to conduct a proper investigation. Dr. Harper stepped forward, her face flushed with anger. Marcus, I can't believe you would drug someone. That's not just fraud, that's assault. As a physician, I'm obligated to report this to the authorities. Can you imagine discovering that someone you trusted had drugged you to steal your family's property? What would you do in Isabella's position? Drop your predictions in the comments below. Sarah Chen was now standing protectively beside Isabella, her legal mind clearly working through the implications of everything they were hearing. Mr. Rothschild, this evidence would be sufficient to not only void the fraudulent contract but to pursue criminal charges against Marcus. Indeed, Rothschild agreed. But I believe in proportional justice, Ms. Chen. Mr. Whitfield has caused considerable damage to Isabella's reputation and emotional well-being. Simple criminal prosecution hardly seems adequate. He turned back to Marcus with the expression of a predator sizing up wounded prey. I understand you've invested heavily in the new luxury resort project in Aspen. The one that represents 60% of your liquid assets. Marcus nodded slowly, fear now evident in his eyes. I bought out your investors this morning, Rothschild said simply. The project is cancelled. Your deposits are forfeit. The blow landed like a physical strike. Isabella watched Marcus stagger backward, his face going from white to gray. The Aspen project had been his signature development, the one that was supposed to cement his status among the ultra-wealthy. But Rothschild wasn't finished. I've also purchased the debts on your 3 hotel properties from their respective lenders. As of tomorrow morning, those loans will be called in full. I estimate you have approximately 72 hours before you're forced into bankruptcy. Isabella felt a complex mix of emotions, vindication, satisfaction, and surprisingly, a small amount of pity for the man who had tried to destroy her. Marcus fell heavily into one of the terrace chairs, his head in his hands. You can't do this. There are laws, regulations. All of which I have followed meticulously, Rothschild replied. Unlike you, Mr. Whitfield, I conduct my business legally. Every acquisition was made at fair market value through legitimate channels. The fact that it results in your financial ruin is simply poetic justice. He walked over to Isabella, his expression softening as he approached. Miss Santos, I know this doesn't undo the trauma you've experienced, but I hope it provides some measure of justice for what was done to you. Isabella found her voice at last. Mr. Rothschild, I don't know how to thank you. I can't believe you've done all this for someone you've never met, just because of something my grandmother did so long ago. Elena Santos didn't just save my life, Rothschild replied quietly. She taught me about courage, about fighting for what's right even when the odds seem impossible. She was barely 25 years old, working in conditions that would break most people, yet she refused to give up on a dying stranger simply because it was the right thing to do. He paused, his eyes distant with memory. I built my fortune on the foundation of the second chance she gave me. Every success I achieved, every company I built, every life I've touched through my charitable work, none of it would have been possible without Elena Santos. Helping her granddaughter isn't charity, Miss Santos. It's the very least I can do to honor the debt I owe her. Isabella felt tears streaming down her cheeks, but for the first time in months, they were tears of gratitude rather than despair. She would have been so proud to know that someone she helped went on to do so much good in the world. Rothschild smiled, the first genuine warmth Isabella had seen from him all evening. She was extraordinary, your grandmother. Tell me, do you still have the locket she wore? Isabella reached beneath her dress and pulled out the silver locket, identical to the one Rothschild carried. I've worn it every day since she died. May I? Rothschild asked gently. Isabella nodded and removed the locket, placing it in his weathered hands. He opened it carefully, revealing the same photograph of the Malibu beach house that was in his own locket, along with a picture of Isabella as a small child sitting on her grandmother's lap. She told me about you, he said softly. Even 80 years ago, she spoke of wanting to have a granddaughter someday, someone she could teach to be strong and kind like her mother had taught her. She would have been immensely proud of the woman you've become. Isabella was crying openly now, not caring that dozens of people were watching. The validation from this powerful man who had known and loved her grandmother felt like a benediction, washing away months of doubt and humiliation. Rothschild closed the locket and handed it back to her. Your grandmother's beach house will be returned to you, of course, along with compensation for the distress you've endured. But I have something else to offer you, if you're interested. Isabella wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. What do you mean? I've been searching for Elena's family for 8 decades, hoping to find someone worthy of carrying on her legacy. I run several charitable foundations focused on healthcare and education. I could use someone with your medical background and your grandmother's heart to help run them. The offer hit Isabella like a thunderbolt. After months of struggling financially, of working double shifts just to make rent, she was being offered the opportunity of a lifetime by one of the most powerful men in the world. I don't know what to say, she stammered. Say you'll think about it, Rothschild replied kindly. There's no pressure. You've been through enough trauma for one lifetime. Take whatever time you need. He turned back to the crowd, his voice carrying clearly across the silent terrace. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you'll remember what you've witnessed here tonight. Power without integrity is worthless. Wealth without honor is meaningless. And those who prey upon the innocent will always, eventually, face justice. Marcus raised his head from his hands, his eyes red and defeated. Alexander, please. We can work something out. I'll give her back the house, I'll pay whatever compensation you think is fair. Mr. Whitfield, Rothschild cut him off coldly, you had your chance to do the right thing. You chose instead to compound your crimes with public humiliation and character assassination. The time for negotiation has passed. He gestured to his security team, who immediately began moving toward their helicopter. Miss Santos, MS. Chen, would you care to join me for dinner tomorrow evening? I'd very much like to hear more about Elena's life after the war, and to discuss how we might honor her memory. Isabella nodded, still overwhelmed by everything that had happened. We'd be honored. As Rothschild walked back toward his helicopter, the party guests began to disperse, their excited chatter filling the air. Isabella could hear fragments of conversation as they passed. Did you see Marcus's face when he realized he was finished? I always knew there was something wrong with that man. Isabella Santos. I need to remember that name. Can you believe Alexander Rothschild himself came to defend her? Dr. Harper approached Isabella with tears in her eyes. My dear, I owe you an apology. I should have stood up for you more forcefully from the beginning. You couldn't have known, Isabella replied graciously. Marcus is very good at manipulation. Jennifer Walsh appeared at Isabella's elbow, her journalist instincts in full swing. Miss Santos, would you be willing to give me an exclusive interview about tonight's events? This story is going to be front-page news tomorrow, and I'd like to make sure your side is told accurately. Sarah Chen stepped between them protectively. My client will consider media requests after she's had time to process tonight's events. As the helicopter lifted off, carrying Alexander Rothschild back into the night, Isabella stood on the terrace watching its lights disappear into the darkness. Around her, the party continued to break up, Marcus's former friends and business associates quietly distancing themselves from a man whose reputation had been utterly destroyed in a single evening. Marcus himself sat alone at one of the tables, staring at the forged contract that had been the instrument of his downfall. His empire was crumbling, his reputation was in ruins, and his freedom was likely to be forfeit once the authorities reviewed the evidence against him. But Isabella found that she felt no satisfaction in his destruction, only a deep sense of justice finally being served. Her grandmother had taught her that revenge was a poison that hurt the person seeking it more than their target, but that justice was different, justice was about restoring balance to the world. Sarah put her arm around Isabella's shoulders. How are you holding up? This has been quite an evening. I keep expecting to wake up and find out this was all a dream, Isabella replied. 6 hours ago I was a broke nurse being publicly humiliated by her ex-fiancé. Now I don't even know what I am. You're the granddaughter of a hero, Sarah said firmly. You're a woman who survived attempted fraud and assault with your dignity intact. And you're someone who just caught the attention of one of the most powerful men in the world, not because you asked for his help, but because you earned it through the character you inherited from your grandmother. As they walked toward the mansion's exit, Isabella touched the locket hanging around her neck. For the first time since her grandmother's death, she felt truly connected to Elena's memory, understanding now that the quiet strength and unwavering morality her grandmother had displayed throughout her life had created ripples that were still spreading decades later. Sometimes karma takes time, Isabella murmured, thinking of her grandmother's favorite saying, but it never misses its target. Behind them, Marcus Whitfield sat in the ruins of his carefully constructed world, learning too late that some debts can never be escaped, and some people should never be underestimated. And that's how justice was served, not through revenge or hatred, but through the enduring power of kindness, courage, and the unbreakable bonds between those who choose to do what's right, regardless of the cost. The next morning, headlines across the country would tell the story of the night a trillionaire arrived at a socialite's party to defend a nurse, but those who were there would remember it as the night they witnessed the difference between justice and revenge, between true power and mere wealth, between a villain's fall and a hero's vindication. Subscribe for more incredible stories of justice and redemption, and remember, in a world where the powerful often prey upon the innocent, sometimes an angel arrives just when hope seems lost, carrying with them the weight of old debts and the promise that good deeds echo through time in ways we never expect.